In a station of the metro by Ezra Pound, the apparition of these faces in the crowd petals on a wet black bob. Another, a world of dew, and within every dewdrop, a world of struggle. Another, an old silent pond, a frog jumps into the pond, splash, silence again. I've just read 3 poems out to you, and this time I'm not going to be talking about the age in which it was written. Instead, I am going to talk about the form of these poems. And what is the form? The form is called haiku. Haiku is a Japanese word, and as we go along for the next few minutes, I'll be talking more and more about the form. Can you try and recollect the other forms of poetry that we have talked about? The sonnet we began with, remember, Shakespeare, and then of course we've had songs and elegies. Of course, many of you probably know the epic. So let's see what the haiku has to offer. The word haiku is a Japanese word referring to a particular kind of poem. It was originally a part of the hokku, and later it became a stand-alone. It is believed that the term came only in the 19th century and was given by somebody called Masuka Shiki. The Japanese haiku is actually a poem written in 3 lines of 5, 7, and 5 syllables. Is it becoming too theoretical? I think I must pause for a moment and explain to you what is meant by the syllable, especially when we are talking about poetry. Since haiku is so dependent on the number of syllables in each line, permit me to explain to you what is meant by a syllable. I'd like to begin with a very simple word like English. If I ask you how many letters there are in the English word, English, you count and you tell me 7. But if I ask you how many syllables there are, maybe you need to pause. And let me explain to you. A syllable is where we stop, where something happens within our mouth and there is a change. So in the word English, there are actually 2 syllables, eng and lish. Not very important unless you're going to be a writer of the haiku poem. But let me read to you once again the poem by Ezra Pound. The apparition of these faces in the crowd, petals on a wet black bob. Count the number of syllables to see what is so important about number syllables in a haiku poem. Among the great poets of the haiku form in the Japanese language, people talk about Matsuo Basho of the Edo period, 1644 to 1693. He is considered to be the greatest master of the haiku to this day. Interestingly, the Japanese haiku is written in 1 line, though today we talk about 3 lines because in the English haiku we have 3 lines. So here is a very famous Basho haiku. The door of thatched hut also changed the owner at the doll's festival. Very interesting, because it seems to be that Basho decided to give his house before he left on a journey. Okay, so the door of the thatched hut also changed the owner because he had handed it over. And then it says, at the doll's festival. What does that mean? It really means that the new owners probably had girls. The kids there were probably girls, and therefore he's talking of the Dolls Festival. There's another one which is very popular. Spring is passing, the birds cry, and the fishes fill with tears on their eyes. Spring is passing. So if you want to look at the meaning at a deeper level, it's probably about the parting of lovers. Because remember, spring is always the period of the blossoming of the trees, of the flowers all around you. And Japan is supposed to be very beautiful when the cherry blossoms are in bloom. So spring is passing, the birds cry, and the fishes fill with tears on their eyes. So this is probably a reference not just to the season, but also to the parting of maybe Basho and his friends. Grasses in summer, the warrior's dreams, all that left. Each one of these poems actually seems to contain a philosophical meaning. So haiku, seemingly a short poem, but there is much more to it. Let me take you now to what is the English haiku. It's non-rhyming in English too. The first English haiku contest, I believe, was held in 1899. You know, I was talking about Basho and I was talking about the 17th century, and here we have jumped to the end of the 19th century. The west wind whispered and touched the eyelids of spring, her eyes prim roses. White caps on the bay, a broken signboard banging in the broken wind. And so it goes on. Nature is constantly there in the haiku poems. We love to experiment, all of us, and I'm sure creative artists love that even more. So today you have what are called single line haikus in the English language. So you have an icicle, the moon drifting through it. Can you imagine, my dear friends, what imagination, what creativity the poet has to have? An icicle, the moon drifting through it. Shut your eyes and try to imagine the icicle. Today, we moved on to another kind of the haiku, which is called the vertical. You know, usually lines are horizontal, but here it's vertical. What is called the vertical haiku. And the vertical haiku is like this. Beneath leaf mold, stone, cool stone. So you've got beneath, leaf mold, stone, cool stone. So it goes like this. Of course, you're free to count the number of syllables. We have other forms of the haiku, like the tenga and the haiga. Remember, these are Japanese words. So to understand them, we will need to go to a Japanese English dictionary, maybe. All that I'm attempted to do here is to give you maybe just a little idea of what this form of poetry is. But we have to go on and read more before we can really appreciate this form, the haiku. If the proof of the pudding is in the eating, the proof of appreciation is in the reading. So my dear friends, I'm going to read a few more haiku poems to you. I write, erase, rewrite, erase again, and then a poppy blooms. Obviously a reference to the poem. And no poem comes easily. So I write, erase, rewrite, erase again, and then a poppy blooms. Another one. The earth shakes just enough to remind us. What philosophy is hidden there? You'll have to read it more than once to really make sense of these haiku poems. Like the sun rises each morning and sets each night, family love is. Can I read that again? Like the sun rises each morning and sets each night. Family love is. The continuum, never ending. The sun never stops rising, so does family life never end. I've told you and I'm repeating it. Nature is present always in every haiku poem. Over the wintry forest, winds howl in rage with no leaves to blow. Over the wintry forest, winds howl in rage with no leaves to blow. The cry of the cicada gives us no sign that presently it will die. The insect, the cicada, something like the cricket, which is common in India. The cry of the cicada gives us no sign that presently it will die. Towards the new moon, since then I waited, and lo, tonight I have my reward. I think it's very important for the reader to also have imagination to understand the actual meaning of the poem. We have the ability to respond to these poems if we want to appreciate them. I write, erase, rewrite, erase again, and then a poppy blooms. This is what each haiku poet is saying to us. Can I end this session by giving you some tips on how to write a good haiku? The format, of course, is important. Remember, I talked about the syllables. So format your haiku into 3 lines. 5 syllables in the first line, 7 syllables in the second line, and 5 syllables in the third. Describe 2 separate images on each of the first 2 lines. Use the third line to bring the images together. Include a nature or a seasonal bird or image somewhere. And then, of course, very, very important, read number of classic haikus to get a sense of the form and structure. And on a lighter note, and probably not so lighter, why don't you go for a walk in the midst of nature? Because that's where great haikus are born. Happy reading and maybe happy writing too.